Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land. And my name is Louise Walsh. I'm the Director of Artsupport Australia, which is an initiative of the Australian Council for the Arts to grow cultural philanthropy. We began on our quest doing that 7 years ago, and what we're attempting to do across the country is to mentor a range of individual artists as well as non-profit arts organisations to help them build more private donors and to secure more grants from foundations. A couple of years ago we presented a session at the Regional Arts Australia Conference in Alice Springs on Indigenous philanthropy. Is that the solution? And this afternoon we are very pleased to present a panel discussion on the topic of is philanthropy the solution for regional artists? We do most of our mentoring with non-profits, probably about 20% of our work with individual artists, and we'd love to do more. And what I'd like to do is to introduce Carolyn Baum to you, who is going to present and facilitate this afternoon's panel discussion. Carolyn is a well-known journalist and broadcaster, and actually an artist in her own right as well. She's facilitated a number of successful forums for us in the last couple of years around the topic of cultural philanthropy. So without further ado, over to you, Carolyn.
I'm just going to start by introducing you to our very eminent and distinguished panel. Sitting closest to me, can you hear me at the back? No. I'm sorry. Can we bring the mics up a little bit? Is that better? No. Houston, we have a problem.
Come to the front.
Is that okay? Let's carry on and see if we can fix this on the run. Immediately next to me, sitting right next to me, is Glen Donnelly, who is a viola player from Gosford in New South Wales. He's got no previous fundraising experience, but on his own he's managed to raise over $100,000 towards his tuition fees to study at the Royal Academy of Music in London. And just to give you an idea, the annual tuition fees are $65,000 a year. It's also his 23rd birthday today, so I think he deserves a special. Sitting next to Glen is Hirst, who is the CEO of the Ian Potter Foundation, which is a role she's had since 2005. Previously, she was a senior policy advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister John Anderson on transport security, but also advised on health issues and worked to achieve major advances in the role of women in regional areas. You can imagine how fascinating it was to talk to her over lunch about the shenanigans that are going on in Canberra this week. The Ian Potter Cultural Trust was set up in 1993 and has supported more than 1,000 artists to date, including, in the current batch, my favourite is a trapeze artist called Emma Jane Henschel. So as you can see, some funding that goes outside the kind of traditional or conventional ideas of the sorts of artists that might get them. There's also a lot of emphasis in particular, we'll come back to this later, I think, in the grants that the Cultural Trust make in overseas development. That's a particular area of interest for Janet. In 2008-9, the Trust disbursed $286,000 to 59 artists with an average grant amount of about $4,800, which is not a huge amount of money, but as I think will emerge in the course of the conversation, a little money can go a very long way when you're supporting individual artists. Finally, we come to Father Arthur Bridge, who has spent over 20 years working in the fields of health and community service, education and the arts. Jana Bent devotes the opening chapter of her new book, Nice Work, to Father Arthur, and of course calls him a modern-day Medici. He is the patron of numerous organisations, including the Sydney Omega Ensemble, the Sydney Youth Orchestra, the Sydney Youth Ballet, the Australian International Conservatorium of Music and High School. He's also a former director of the Riverside Theatres in Parramatta, the Joan Sutherland Performing Arts Centre in Penrith, and a member of the Music Board of the Australia Council. He's the founder and chairman of Ars Musica Australis, which since 1996 has been dedicated to providing support to young and emerging creative talent. Since 2008, he's also been the parish priest of St Oliver Plunkett Parish in Harris Park. And I'm also told that he does a mean impersonation of Pope Benedict, which we may not get to do today, sadly. Well, as I'm sure many of you know from the sessions that you were in this morning and the coverage that David Throsby's report has had in the media, the news for individual artists in this country at the moment is pretty grim. Grants to artists have been declining both in number and in quantity. And new research shows that artists are doing it tougher than ever, with a median income of around $35,000 per annum, which includes arts and non-arts related income. 16% of artists earn less than $10,000 from their work. And many artists are, of course, being unofficially supported by their partners and their families. The number of artists, interestingly, living in the regions has gone up, so that in 2009, 47% of writers in Australia were living in the regions, which is up from 26% in 2002. And similarly, the number of artists in the regions currently, individual artists, has gone up by 15%. So that's a very interesting trend, particularly given our topic today. I guess I thought that it would be inspiring to start with your stories, your individual stories, particularly you, Glen, and then you, Father Arthur. So, Glen, would you like to tell us how, given the fact that you have no experience in fundraising, you've become so good at this?
Yeah, I started having to fundraise in probably 2006. This was my year after high school, which I graduated in 2005. And I knew that I wanted to become a soloist. I was really ambitious, and I decided I'd go overseas to study. And so I took a year off to travel overseas and do a summer study tour and competitions as well. And that was for about 3 months. And I had to actually fundraise for this trip because there's a lot of airfares going around the world, and a lot of the fees for these courses I was going to. So this was the beginning of my fundraising. And then a year later, I got an invitation to study at the Royal Academy of Music in London, an amazing opportunity. And this was where I had to first start to raise an enormous amount of money. The fees are actually $35,000 and the living expenses are $25,000, so it adds up to about $70,000 per year. And this is obviously a very large amount for individuals to raise. And I basically started off by just looking around. I knew there was something called grants. I didn't really know much about it. My parents and I actually, we started looking up this grants directory book. So we looked up, grants for, individuals, grants for music individuals. And, there were about 3, grants available. There was hardly anything for individuals. So that was really difficult. But I started from there and just kept on going. And, in the end, I found a lot of avenues in philanthropy, which I'll probably talk about later on in the session.
Now, there's a nice connection here because, in fact, Father Arthur has been responsible for some of the philanthropic support for your tuition. So, Father Arthur, would you like to introduce Arts Music as a project, how you came to establish that, and then perhaps talk a little bit about Glen?
In about 1996, I was appointed to a parish in Western Sydney. And there are heaps and heaps of wonderful young men and women who could make a significant contribution, I thought, to the world of the arts. In fact, even to today, I would like you to know that in the poorer sections of, if you want to put it that way, in Western Sydney, are now producing the largest number of male ballet dancers in the principal companies right around the world, not just in the Australian ballet, but in the Royal Ballet in London and in Copenhagen and even in America. I saw and discovered that so many people had never had a chance to go to a live concert, had never witnessed a visit to a museum and seen a painting or a potter pot or a weaver weave, or to experience the exhilaration of an orchestral performance. So I got a couple of my mates that I went to school with and university, and I said, look, let's try and do something to move this along. So we formed this foundation. I'm not a millionaire, and I probably never will be. But I am a passionate man, and I hope that I've inspired lots of other men and women to join forces with me. So today we raise quite a few $100,000 a year the hard way, and it is given out to about 100 scholars studying all over the world in all of the art forms. We're probably the largest commissioner of music in Australia, and we have been significantly responsible for taking families to concerts, ordinary Australian families to concerts, giving artistic groups a chance to perform. So I haven't had to advertise, but one day I got an invitation to support Glen. He was very passionate, and I couldn't refuse him. And so the association has gone on. What I have found to be important in the support of the individual artists is that I don't make one-off grants. I have a commitment to the artist for their student life and after their graduation, because I'm aware that although you are qualified in your particular genre, it is hard to live and to find a permanent posting in any artistic form. And so I suppose I'll be getting another letter or a telephone call from Glen when he finishes at the Royal Academy. That's it in a nutshell.
Janet, I mentioned in the introduction that the emphasis in the grants that the Cultural Trust makes is on overseas development, and that the grants are relatively small. So would you like to explain the emphasis on the overseas element and the size of the grants?
I will. Can I just say at the beginning, we also have a nice relationship with Glen too. Because Glen has received 2 Cultural Trust grants. And perhaps if, I don't know, later we're talking about, what makes a good application, he's also had 1 knocked back, but that didn't stop him applying again and being passionate. So the Cultural Trust, I'll just explain, we have the Ian Potter Foundation and the Ian Potter Cultural Trust. And the Cultural Trust was set up in 1993 specifically so that we could fund individuals. And the emphasis is on emerging artists, talented young emerging talented artists, to go overseas for professional development. And it might be to do a study tour, or like Glen to actually be doing, a course at the Royal Academy. And I mean, people go all over the world, do a variety of courses, come from a variety of art practices. And the maximum grant is $7,000. And so our grants range up. It's really what people do need. But I suppose the wonderful thing about philanthropy is that it isn't always the size of the grant. It's actually perhaps being able to come in at an important time, just come in at the right time so that that person then can go on to the next stage.
Glen, I mean, given that you have to focus so completely in terms of discipline and dedication to be a musician in the top, sort of at the top level, at a very competitive level that you're working at, you then have to develop this other set of skills, which are social skills, they're people skills, really, when you're being your own advocate and spruiking yourself. Can you talk a little bit about how you went about doing that and what you found most difficult about the approach? Or did you not find any of it difficult? Are you just naturally good at asking for money?
No, well, it's a sort of skill that artists usually are not necessarily born with, and it's something that I have developed. And when you have to ask someone for money, you have to learn to be bold. You have to learn to just ask, and ask for more than you think you might be able to ask them, because the only answer that they can give is no. That's negative. That's the worst that can happen. And I've really learned, in the end, to also ask again and get back to them. And so, when I was first looking for funding, and I found some grants foundation